In a recent statement on his social media platform, Truth Social, former U.S. President Donald Trump issued a stern warning to Russia regarding its ongoing military actions in Ukraine. He indicated that if President Vladimir Putin does not take steps to conclude the conflict, he would impose high tariffs and additional sanctions on Russia. This marks a significant moment in international relations, particularly in the context of the ongoing war, which has had far-reaching implications for global politics, economics, and security. The war in Ukraine, which escalated with Russia's full-scale invasion in February 2022, has drawn widespread condemnation from the international community. The conflict has led to substantial loss of life, widespread displacement, and significant economic disruption both within Ukraine and beyond its borders. The West, led by the United States and its European allies, has responded with a series of sanctions aimed at crippling the Russian economy, targeting key sectors such as finance, energy, and military supplies. These sanctions have sought to increase the cost of aggression for Russia and compel a withdrawal of its forces from Ukrainian territory. Trump's assertion that he would negotiate a resolution to the conflict in just one day reflects a bold stance that is characteristic of his approach to foreign policy. Throughout his presidency, Trump often emphasized a preference for direct negotiations and agreements, sometimes dismissing traditional diplomatic channels in favor of a more personal touch. His promise to resolve the Ukraine crisis quickly suggests he believes in his ability to leverage economic pressure to achieve political ends. The imposition of high tariffs on Russian goods would represent a significant escalation in economic warfare. Tariffs are taxes imposed on imported goods, making them more expensive and less competitive in the domestic market. For a country like Russia, which relies heavily on its energy exports, such tariffs could exacerbate the economic challenges already faced due to existing sanctions. Trump's approach would likely target specific sectors that are vital to the Russian economy, such as oil and gas. By raising tariffs, the U.S. could further diminish Russia's revenue, potentially hindering its ability to sustain military operations in Ukraine. However, this strategy may also have unintended consequences. Higher tariffs could lead to retaliatory measures from Russia, further straining economic ties and escalating tensions between the two nations. In addition to tariffs, Trump's warning included the possibility of imposing further sanctions. Sanctions have been a critical tool in the U.S. and its allies' efforts to deter Russian aggression. The existing sanctions regime has already targeted numerous individuals and entities within Russia, including oligarchs, government officials, and state-owned enterprises. The effectiveness of sanctions can vary. While they aim to weaken the economic foundation of the aggressor state, their success often hinges on international cooperation. For sanctions to be effective, they require a unified response from multiple countries. If key economic partners of Russia, such as China or India, do not participate in the sanctions, their impact may be significantly diminished. Trump's mention of further sanctions indicates a willingness to intensify the economic pressure on Russia. However, the Kremlin's response suggests a readiness to engage in dialogue. Dmitry Peskov, the spokesman for President Putin, emphasized Russia's desire for an equal dialogue, a mutually respectful dialogue, highlighting a willingness to communicate despite the threats. The Kremlin's reaction to Trump's warning reveals a complex interplay of defiance and diplomacy. While Peskov noted that Russia is prepared for dialogue, he also pointed out that Trump's threats are not new. This suggests a level of familiarity with Trump's approach, as well as a strategic calculation regarding how to respond to U.S. pressures. Peskov's statement that we're waiting for signals that are yet to arrive indicates a desire for constructive engagement, even amidst escalating tensions. It underscores a recognition that dialogue can be beneficial, but it also reflects a belief that the U.S. should take steps to signal its intentions clearly before meaningful discussions can occur. Trump's history regarding sanctions and tariffs offers insight into his current stance. During his presidency, he was known for a confrontational approach to trade, particularly with China. His administration imposed tariffs on billions of dollars worth of Chinese goods, arguing that such measures were necessary to protect American jobs and industries. This pattern of using tariffs as leverage has been consistent, and it seems to be a strategy he is prepared to apply in the context of U.S.-Russia relations. Moreover, Trump's previous comments about negotiating peace deals and his willingness to engage with adversarial leaders have been a hallmark of his foreign policy. His belief in personal diplomacy is evident in how he approached relationships with North Korea and other global leaders. This tendency to favor direct negotiation over multilateral discussions may play a crucial role in how he envisions resolving the conflict in Ukraine. Trump's warning has broader implications for global geopolitics. The ongoing war in Ukraine has already shifted alliances and influenced international relations, with countries reassessing their positions regarding Russia. The potential for high tariffs and additional sanctions could further polarize the international community, forcing nations to choose sides in a more pronounced manner. Countries that rely on Russian energy exports may find themselves in a difficult position. For instance, European nations have been working to reduce their dependence on Russian gas and oil in the wake of the invasion. However, the transition to alternative energy sources is not instantaneous, and any abrupt changes in trade policies could lead to heightened energy prices and economic instability in the short term. International institutions such as the United Nations and the European Union have been pivotal in addressing the crisis in Ukraine. These bodies have coordinated responses among member states, implementing sanctions and providing humanitarian aid to those affected by the conflict. Trump's approach, if taken to its logical conclusion, could challenge the established norms of international cooperation. An increased emphasis on unilateral action, such as imposing tariffs and sanctions without broad consensus, could undermine multilateral efforts to resolve the crisis. This shift may lead to a fragmented approach to foreign policy, where individual nations act in their own interests rather than working collaboratively towards a common goal. The potential outcomes of Trump's warnings encompass a range of scenarios. If he were to implement high tariffs and additional sanctions, Russia may react in various ways. It could lead to an escalation of hostilities in Ukraine, as Russia seeks to assert its influence, or it could prompt negotiations if the economic pressures become untenable. Conversely, if Trump were to take a more diplomatic approach, emphasizing dialogue and negotiation, it might open avenues for de-escalation. However, this would require a significant shift in both US and Russian attitudes towards the conflict and each other. Additionally, the political context in the United States plays a role in shaping Trump's actions and statements. The Russian economy has faced significant challenges since the onset of the war in Ukraine. Sanctions imposed by Western nations have targeted various sectors, including finance, energy, and technology. As a result, Russia has experienced inflation, currency devaluation, and a decline in foreign investment. The cumulative effect of these sanctions has strained Russia's economic stability and its ability to finance military operations. High tariffs, as proposed by Trump, could exacerbate these economic pressures. By making Russian exports more expensive, these tariffs would further limit Russia's revenue from its key industries, particularly oil and gas. Given that energy exports constitute a substantial portion of Russia's GDP, this could have dire consequences for the country's fiscal health. In response to the possibility of increased sanctions and tariffs, Russia may adopt a variety of strategies. Historically, Russia has demonstrated resilience in the face of economic sanctions, often pivoting toward alternative markets, particularly in Asia. China, in particular, could play a crucial role in mitigating the impact of Western sanctions by increasing its trade with Russia. However, such a pivot may not fully compensate for the losses incurred from reduced trade with Western nations. Additionally, Russia may seek to strengthen its alliances with other countries that share its interests or are willing to oppose Western influence. This could lead to a realignment of global partnerships, as nations reassess their positions in light of the shifting geopolitical landscape. Energy markets are central to the discussion of sanctions and tariffs. Russia's economy is heavily reliant on energy exports, and fluctuations in global oil prices can significantly impact its financial situation. Should the U.S. impose high tariffs on Russian oil, it could lead to a spike in global oil prices as supply is disrupted. Such price increases could have widespread implications, affecting economies worldwide, particularly those that are already struggling with inflation. Moreover, the ongoing transition to renewable energy sources in many countries complicates the situation. Nations are increasingly looking to diversify their energy supplies to reduce dependence on Russian energy. This shift presents both challenges and opportunities for global energy markets, as countries scramble to secure alternative sources of energy. Trump's warning comes at a time when the U.S. and its allies are grappling with the challenges posed by Russia. The unity shown among NATO members and European nations in response to the invasion of Ukraine has been a notable aspect of this conflict. However, maintaining this unity is crucial, especially if the U.S. pursues a more aggressive stance with sanctions and tariffs. The Biden administration has emphasized a coordinated response to Russian aggression, working closely with European allies to ensure a cohesive approach. Trump's unilateral threats could create tensions within this coalition, potentially leading to disagreements over strategy and the best path forward. As tensions rise between the U.S. and Russia, other global powers, such as China and India, are watching closely. Both countries have historically maintained a level of neutrality regarding the conflict, often calling for dialogue and negotiation rather than sanctions. However, their responses could change depending on how the situation evolves. China, for instance, has strong economic ties with Russia and may seek to balance its relationships with both Russia and the West. If the U.S. takes a more aggressive stance, it could push China closer to Russia, complicating the geopolitical landscape further. On the other hand, India has been cautious in its approach, advocating for dialogue, while also maintaining its strategic interests. Public opinion plays a crucial role in shaping foreign policy decisions. Trump, as a prominent political figure, must consider the views of his supporters when articulating his stance on Russia. The American public's perception of the war in Ukraine and the implications of U.S. involvement will likely influence Trump's decisions and rhetoric. Polling data indicates that a significant portion of the American public supports providing aid to Ukraine and imposing sanctions on Russia. However, there are also concerns about the long-term consequences of escalating tensions. Balancing these viewpoints will be essential for any political leader navigating this complex landscape. If Trump follows through on his warnings and imposes high tariffs and further sanctions, it could lead to an escalation of hostilities between the U.S. and Russia. This scenario may result in increased military confrontations in Ukraine, as Russia seeks to assert its influence and respond to economic pressures. Such a situation could have dire consequences for the region, potentially drawing in other nations and escalating into a broader conflict. Conversely, if both the U.S. and Russia recognize the need for dialogue, there may be opportunities for diplomatic engagement. Trump's assertion that he could negotiate a settlement could pave the way for discussions aimed at de-escalation. This would require a mutual willingness to compromise and address the underlying issues that have fueled the conflict. A potential middle ground could be a prolonged stalemate, where both sides continue to exert economic pressure without making significant progress toward resolution. In this scenario, the conflict could become a drawn-out affair, with both the U.S. and Russia maintaining their positions while inflicting economic pain on each other. The humanitarian consequences of such a situation would be dire, with civilians in Ukraine continuing to suffer. Regardless of the political maneuvering, the ongoing conflict has a devastating impact on civilians in Ukraine. The humanitarian crisis resulting from the war has led to millions of Ukrainians being displaced, with many seeking refuge in neighboring countries. The destruction of infrastructure, homes, and essential services has created dire living conditions for those who remain in the country. International aid organizations have been working tirelessly to provide support, but the scale of the crisis is immense. Ongoing military operations complicate relief efforts and make it challenging to deliver necessary supplies to those in need. The longer the conflict persists, the greater the toll on the civilian population. The international community has mobilized to provide humanitarian assistance to Ukraine. Countries and organizations have pledged funds, supplies, and support to alleviate the suffering of those affected by the war. However, the effectiveness of these efforts is contingent upon the security situation on the ground. As the U.S. and Russia continue to negotiate their positions, the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine must remain a priority. Humanitarian corridors and ceasefires are crucial for delivering aid and ensuring the safety of civilians. The ongoing dialogue between nations should also include a focus on addressing the humanitarian needs arising from the conflict. The conflict in Ukraine has significant implications for global security and the role of alliances such as NATO. The unity demonstrated by NATO members in response to Russian aggression has strengthened the alliance and underscored the importance of collective defense. However, the potential for increased tensions with Russia raises questions about the future of NATO and its ability to adapt to new challenges.